It's a good question, what to include, what not to include. 2-hour running time seems to be, felt like the right amount of time. I mean, there's lots of things that we didn't re-include, but, you raised the larger, more philosophical issue about, a lot of people did walk away from the second film thinking Byers might be guilty, and walking away from this film thinking that Hobbs might be guilty. And, I'm still processing that. As a documentarian, as somebody in the truth business, on the one hand, I stand behind all of these films, as does Bruce. On the other hand, it's troubling to me that what we were so convinced of, a decade ago, we're not so convinced of now. And what does that say about the nature of truth and the elusive nature of what we do, and how things change over time? That theory, the theory that you're referring to, was, there was a belief that some of these wounds were human bite marks. That theory has been discarded by the new forensic team. And so, 10 years from now, will this theory be discarded, is the question one has to ask, about the post-mortem animal.
Are you alluding to part 4?
These are all very troubling questions. And maybe I'm deluding myself when I say that I don't overly worry about it. On the one hand, I'm fascinated by it and troubled by it. On the other hand, I excuse it because I don't think we were creating the story, we were following the story. And in the second film, the WM3.org people hired a forensic expert, a profiler, who was following the case and coming up with these theories, and we as journalists were covering that. And in the third film, the forensic theories have changed, and we are not creating the forensic evidence, we are covering the story. That's convenient to say, because on the other hand, it is troubling that, but it also points to just the danger of coming to, I don't think the third film is necessarily saying Hobbs is the killer. The third film is, like the second film, saying that in this and the first film, that when you put somebody on death row in this country, the jury is instructed to find that result beyond all reasonable doubt. And from the start, in this case, there have been so many other plausible explanations, and all DNA evidence points away from the West Memphis 3, and there are so many problems with this case. It's clear that these guys did not get a fair trial. But for us to say that somebody else is definitively the killer would be to have missed the whole lesson of the first movie. But they're all very troubling and interesting questions.
There just is a complicated fact that there's a strange relationship between and a difficult problem for both defense teams and I think these guys as directors, which is that reasonable doubt and raising reasonable doubt involves looking at other people. And a defense team has an obligation to do that, and if you're going to try to look at reasonable doubt as a filmmaker too, you also have an obligation to do that. But I think it's the film goes to great lengths to only push things just exactly as far as the evidence allows. So.
In the credits, it mentioned at the very last credit, Honoraria. Who got paid, why, and was it anyone of significance?
There have been a history of paying family members from the beginning, which raises other ethical issues and questions. In the first film, we arrived from HBO at a time, at a horrible time of crisis for these families, and we were walking into homes of people who were already, in some cases, living below the poverty level, and people who were dealing with incredible tragedy and whose lives had become paralyzed, the 3 families of the victims, 3 families of the defendants. And we had long established access and were filming, and what turned out to be what we thought was going to be a shorter project was a larger investment in time. And we're walking into these homes, shooting film, which is at the time, much more expensive than shooting video, coming in with equipment. And Bruce and I at first started, we literally saw empty cupboards and people not working and not able to buy groceries, and so we would come and bring a bag of groceries or whatever, and that started to feel a little weird and demeaning, and so we went back to HBO and we said, these families, are in desperate need, and just made a unilateral decision that we would pay a one-time honorarium of $7,500 to each family about 4 months into the process. And so unfortunately that expectation amongst family members continued into the second and third film. So family members received honorariums because we established an initial precedent. I stand by that decision, even though one could question the ethics of the journalistic ethics of paying somebody, but at the time we felt it was the right decision because these people literally couldn't afford, some of them couldn't afford groceries. So it is something that has haunted these films throughout.
But I think it's important to say that in this final film, to answer your question, that we can't really say who specifically was paid. There were only 2 people paid in this entire film, and we went to great lengths to squash that idea with anybody else who brought it up, to not let that become the way that we operated. And that was something that we talked about a lot and very carefully executed. So.